Minister, in closing.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank everyone for their debate today in the Education Legislation Amendment Bill. I just want to go through and touch on a few points. The member for Port Darwin brought up that children not at school are children at risk, and I couldn't agree more, Madam Speaker. And as the Minister said, it is about the engagement officers and also the circuit breaker team in Katherine also working with families and following up with those families the next day for those children that are out at risk out on the streets. And I think that's the most important thing. Everyone's spoken about the punitive, things that we're going to be doing. You need to have both, Madam Speaker. And whilst, people can say that they thought this was punitive, the facts is we have had 8 years of a Labor government that have seen these, the attendance rates and literacy and numeracy absolutely go to shocking levels, Madam Speaker. So, this is one way that we are going to change that dial. The member for Gwadja, tells me his contribution tells me all, really, because he contradicted himself quite a bit, because this morning he spoke in the housing debate about let's get these kids in schools and work with education. That was what he said this morning, Madam Speaker. Yet this afternoon, he just went on about the concerns he has, that it's punitive and we need to work with families. We absolutely are working with families, Madam Speaker. As I said, this is not about fining people. This is an educative approach. The fine is the very last resort that we will go to. So the member for Gwadja spoke about funerals and ceremony and taking all those into consideration, and we absolutely will. Those are all things that are taken into consideration. And so, whilst he says, I don't care about all students, it is quite the opposite, Madam Speaker. And I think we could all agree in the House, we all care about the best outcomes for children and learning and changing the dial that we've been left after 8 years of Labor. Members spoke about the bilingual education, and there's 4 schools across the Territory, Madam Speaker, that have had 50 years of bilingual education. And we have great schools, we have great teachers. As I said, we've got bilingual education, but lots of those schools, Madam Speaker, are only 35 and 30%. And a lot of those schools with the Better Fairer Schools Agreement are getting extra funding. Some of them are quite considerable extra funding. So, it's about working with those schools and making sure that they are doing their part in getting people to school as well, and talking to their community members. I heard a lot about members on the opposite side in opposition saying we hadn't consulted out there. We actually took this to the election, which is what the member for Karama had said. And so we consulted very widely at the election. It was no surprise to anyone that we were going to bring back attendance officers, boost literacy and numeracy, if we should get in to government. And that is what we are doing, Madam Speaker. We are here to, provide a solid grounding in education, and we need those children to get to school, because if kids don't get to school, they can't learn and they can't grow up to be like the member for Mulka sitting here that got a good education and went on to do other educational outcomes down south and then was called back to his community. And I commend the member for Mulka for standing up and talking about his journey in his education. But that's what we want members on the opposite side of the House to do, to go and talk to people in their community about the importance of education. And that takes everyone doing that, Madam Speaker, and it takes families and members of Parliament and our school attendance officers that are right out there across the community, engaging with families each and every day. The member for Nightcliff, she agreed to prioritise education, but doesn't want to have, she says there wasn't any consultation. Again, I would say, member for Karama, perhaps you could give her a look at our plan, because you're always talking about it and are telling everyone about the plan that we actually took to the election. The member for Fanny Bay spoke about her work in education, which was great to hear, and it's always great to hear the member for Fanny Bay's contribution, because she has actually had that lived experience. And she spoke about the SEAM program, which the member for Guadja was talking about, and told us about the poor implementation. Whilst she said it may have been good, the implementation was poor. And Madam Speaker, I think we can probably say that the implementation on quite a few things was pretty poor, which is why those are sitting on the opposite side of the House now, as opposed to us being in government. The member for Daly said we need to get kids back to school. This is exactly what we are doing, Madam Speaker. It is about getting kids to school. It's about addressing root causes. This amendment speaks about valuing education and the cultural differences. So, you know, it's about addressing all of these things and bringing it all and making sure that kids get to school, because at the end of the day, we need kids in school to be educated. The member for Fong Lim spoke about the 5 different public schools that he went to, you know, and the education outcomes that he experienced. The member for Mulka, as I've said, he spoke about bilingual education. I've had many conversations with the member for Mulka about bilingual education, and as I said, we've had 4 schools that have done 50 years of bilingual education. I was out at Shepparton College last year, Madam Speaker, and whilst bilingual education, everyone on the opposite side says that's great and we should be doing that more, and it is great. I've seen it in practice. Yet, Madam Speaker, 30% of children were at the Shepparton College that day. They had it on their front desk, 30% of children. So, you know, whilst it is great, you know, maybe the member for Mulka needs to go out and talk to the families in his community and let them know the importance of getting their children to school. Because if they don't get their kids to school and boost the attendance, they're not going to be able to be educated. He talked about great leadership. You know, and that's what we have. We've got great principals, we've got great teachers. As I said, we've got great schools, we've got bilingual education. Yet still, Madam Speaker, we cannot seem to get these children to school. He wanted to clean out the department. So, you know, I thank the department for all the work they do in education. We have special measures also, Madam Speaker, to get more Aboriginal people into the workforce. So you can't get those people into the workforce if they do not attend school. I understand the member for Mulka's frustration, but, you know, and he says he sat here for 8 years and hasn't seen people working with him. I would beg to differ, Madam Speaker, because I think, you know, when we've spoken about bilingual education and when the member for Mulka has asked things, we've been very open and happy to give him all of the information that he's actually required. The member for Arnhem spoke about every child deserves to thrive and have a safe education. 100%. Couldn't disagree with her more, Madam Speaker. And that is what we are doing. As the Minister for Education, it is about making sure that the children, as the member for Johnson said, even at Catherine High School, every child and every teacher in that school needs to feel safe in that environment. So it is about making sure kids get to school, they're doing the right thing, they're getting an education. Yeah, she spoke about needing to do things differently. Exactly, that's what we're doing. We're doing things differently, Madam Speaker. On the opposite side, they keep on talking about the CLP government. Like, we've had 8 years in between of a Labor government. There was a whole reason why that CLP government were voted out. And they got in, and they were there for 8 years, and they chose to not do anything about this, Madam Speaker. As I said, we saw poor literacy, we saw poor numeracy and poor attendance rates right across the territory. And thank you to the member for Arafura. He didn't attend the briefing and clearly didn't get briefed by his colleagues, so what can I say about that contribution? So I'd like to thank everyone for their contribution today. We have actually, in Term 4 last year, Madam Speaker, there was 476 compliance notices actually given out. So, Madam Speaker, Territorians elected this government with a clear mandate to tackle youth crime head-on. This means addressing the root causes, starting with getting kids back to school and onto a better path, and we are committed to doing just that. These reforms are not just about enforcing school attendance, they're about safeguarding the future of our young people. And the overarching goal of these reforms is clear: to increase attendance rates, protect vulnerable children from falling through the cracks of our education system, and ensure every child, Madam Speaker, in the Territory has access to the education they deserve. Under the current law, school attendance is mandatory for children aged 6 to 17 in the Northern Territory. It is the law, and yet under the previous Labor government, we saw attendance rates steadily decline, with compliance measures underused and enforcement falling short. Compliance measures exist for a reason: to hold parents accountable, to remind them of their legal obligation to send their child to school. And I'll remind those on the opposite side, Madam Speaker, it is actually against the law to withhold your child from school. So, you know, I've spoken before about the children on the intensive support roles, and there were 1,600, I think, children on the intensive support role, and we've seen a reduction of about 350 since we have had school attendance officers, and we've been working with those families. And that was the intensive support role was something that was actually on the side, that was hidden from us when we were in opposition. The attendance rates were out there, but then there was another separate role of those children that were on the intensive support role. So compliance measures exist, as I said, for a reason: to hold parents accountable, to remind them of their legal obligations to send their children to school, and to ensure there are real consequences when they fail to meet that responsibility. So let me be clear again, Madam Speaker, it is not about punishing families with children who are struggling with legitimate challenges such as anxiety or medical issues. This is about holding parents accountable who consistently fail to send their children to school without justifiable reason, depriving them of their right to an education and a chance for a better future. Under the previous Labor government, attendance rates across the Territory plummeted. Compliance notices dropped by a staggering 73.4%, and infringement notices fell by a shocking 93.1%. It's simply unacceptable. The bill we are debating today sends a strong message: we are serious about improving school attendance. We are reinforcing existing attendance measures in the Education Act to bring clarity, accountability and tougher enforcement to the system. One of the key reforms in this bill is to enshrine the role of the school attendance officer into the legislation, and this ensures a dedicated focus on boosting attendance and engagement as part of the government's wider strategy. While the Chief Executive will still have the authority to appoint other authorised officers, this reform guarantees that the priority remains on getting kids back to school. We're also streamlining enforcement processes to make them more efficient and effective. We are clarifying that when an authorised officer exercises their powers, they only need to present their ID when directly interacting with that individual. So this will allow us to send notices by post when parents cannot be reached or when it's unsafe to approach them directly. Finally, this bill supports the national rollout of the school identifier system, which comes out in 2027, a system that will allow us to track students across jurisdictions and safeguard those at the risk of disengagement. While the system won't be fully implemented until 2027, we are preparing now by updating the education regulations to ensure that our schools are ready to collect the necessary information when the time comes. And that means, Madam Speaker, that when children go interstate or, I know that out near Largemanu, they go across the border into WA, down in the bottom of the Northern Territory, they go into the APY lands, and the same at Lake Nash, they go across into Queensland. So it's about tracking those students and making sure that they are still remaining engaged in education. The results of our focus on school attendance are already evident. In Term 4 of 2024, after reintroducing school attendance officers, we saw a significant rise in the number of compliance and infringement notices issued. In just Term 4 alone, we issued 476 compliance notices, more than the entire total of 454 issued in 2023. with 38 infringement notices, matching the total for all of 2023. Importantly, many of these notices have already led to parents complying with the directions given, showing that these measures are working and driving real change. And I'd just like to reiterate that to those on the opposite side who think that this is punitive and it is not working. That is clearly a benchmark to say this is working. It is a start. It is by continually engaging with families out there and continually having those conversations to make them aware of the importance of education. So these reforms are an essential part of our government's ongoing efforts to ensure every young person in the Northern Territory has the chance to succeed and reach their full potential. So far, we have 48 of 54 frontline authorised officers' positions filled and 17 of 24 school attendance officers filled. So this is our opportunity, Madam Speaker, to show our commitment to a brighter future for all Territorians. I'd like to thank all of the department staff and all of the members that have given a contribution this afternoon, and I commend the bill to the House.